unfinished. I mean, it's an unfinished manuscript. It sort of ends.
Yeah.
And, and it just sort of cuts off. But it was part of a much larger work that he was working on called The Teuto-Germanic Empire and the Social Revolution, which was something that he had worked on between 1870 and 1872. And this is very similar to Marx or Lenin, where he's just as much a part of the movement as he is writing about it. So he's part of it. So sometimes he just didn't have the ability to go back and finish things. He'd start things and not finish them because he didn't have the time. And then eventually he would die. So it's the same with Marx, the same with Lenin. Lenin famously didn't finish The State and Revolution. Has that postscript where he says, I didn't finish it, but to be honest, it's a lot more fun to do this than it is to write it. And so that's what makes it really interesting. And I think knowing that it's a part of a much larger work, knowing that it's something that was a work in progress, makes it interesting to me because Bakunin's ideas themselves were sort of a work in progress. He was always challenging himself. He was always moving and changing and shifting and not so content with having some, congealed idea that would just sort of be there forever. He was much more interested in the active living of history rather than merely writing about it or writing about its sort of preordained movement. And that's what makes him very different than Marx in a lot of ways. In many ways, they're very similar. And I can imagine why they butted heads because, in many ways, they were very alike. They were very passionate, very highly moralistic, deeply committed to their projects. And so that's what makes the reading of God and the State a lot of joy. He reminds me of really two other writers. I think of Emma Goldman especially because she was a big influence. He was a big influence on her. But the other person who I think about who is writing nearly the exact same kind of stuff in the 1870s was Robert Ingersoll, who I've written about extensively.
Okay.
And Ingersoll, famously writes stuff like Some Mistakes of Moses, which is this speech that he gave, this critical review of the first 5 books of the Old Testament of the Bible. And some of the parts of God and the State that I read, I was like, oh, you could pull this and put this in an Ingersoll speech. Like they're very close. Now, Ingersoll was not an anarchist. He was a Lincoln radical Republican. So his politics were very different than Bakunin. But I think they would have been very simpatico on the nature of religion and how it controls.